Hello and welcome to this short video on making your own potting mix. So this video is to accompany a Google Doc where you can start to create your own recipes. Either jot down exactly what you're using and the process you're going through, or start with my recipe, play around with the ratios and track your experiments. One of the reasons I love teaching potting mix is that it helps eliminate some of the single-use plastic in the gardening industry, and also empowers home gardeners to understand more about what type of soil is needed to grow really healthy plants. On top of that, a lot of us have worm farms and compost bins, and I would love to see more people being able to use the soil that they're making. So without further ado, on we go. If you are gardening with children, then I have an online course, Family Friendly Biodynamics, that has lots and lots of tips on how to get kids into the garden, growing food and flowers and enjoying each season of the year. Otherwise, if your next step is going deeper into making top quality compost, then my hot compost online course could be the next step for you. But otherwise, this skill of making your own potting mix will help you use all the soil you're making to grow your own seedlings and really be one step closer to freedom from the garden centre. So this is what a lot of gardening looks like here in New Zealand, is so much plastic. Some of it gets recycled, but a lot of it ends up in landfill, and the companies putting soil into these bags are making lots and lots of money. Oh gosh, the image hasn't shown. On the left is a handful of the soil from the garden, which is sort of typical of what I dig up. That's annoying. But on the right, those are the raised beds that I set up a few years ago to compare in-ground worm farm with biodynamic compost with just normal garden soil. And month by month, I would compare the different tastes of the vegetables, the size of the vegetables, the height of the flowers. And what I learned was that in-ground worm farms make a big difference, and biodynamic compost preparations help with the flavour. So here we go, the recipe, and you'll have this in the Google Doc as well, but I want to talk through each of these elements. So the top one, biodynamic compost, I put 25% to 50%, so about a quarter of your potting mix, up to half of your potting mix. If that biodynamic compost is finished, it is ready to use at that high ratio. I often am needing to be really careful and stretch it out over a lot more of the gardening that I'm doing, that it's sometimes actually as little as 10% of the finished potting mix. Worm castings I have put as 10% up to 40%. So worm castings, this is basically worm poo, the finished soil that you take out of a worm farm. And the amount you want to use in your potting mix will really depend on how much compost you have and what quality garden soil you have. So for me at the moment, the worm castings, I'm probably veering towards the lower end, like that 10% level, because the garden soil where I'm living, I've been working this little property for 2 years now, that I can pretty much dig up a bucket load of garden soil and it's almost good enough to use as potting mix. So I've put garden soil as 10% up to 50%. A lot of my customers are just starting to make their own potting mix and they're not happy with the quality of soil in the garden. Even if you don't think it's very good, like if it's heavy clay or really sandy or not a lot of life, it's still, I think it's important to use at least 10% in your potting mix so that the seedlings you're planting get used to the soil profile of their final destination. And it helps build resilience in the garden. Next ingredient here is leaf mold. So in autumn, it is like a leaf celebration. Find yourself a tree or 2 trees or 10 trees and bag up those leaves. I use a compost aerator to turn them once a month or so, just to break up any chunks that are turning into a sort of a solid anaerobic smelly mess. And over, I'd say, each 3 months or so, the volume decreases. So I have one great big oak tree, and first year I was here, I filled 10 big weed bags with leaves. And within a year, I reduced that down to 8 bags, then down to 6 bags, then 3 bags, and in the end I had 1.5 bags. So by my calculation, oak leaves shrink down to 15% of their original volume. And they're really good at holding moisture. They're a lovely light mixture. You want to just Google or flick me an email if you have any questions about whether the leaves you're collecting are suited for use in potting mix of the plants you're growing. There are some trees whose leaves you probably wouldn't want to use. I'll actually make myself a note to write a blog post on that and link it in the comments. Okay, so 10% up to 50% leaf mold. Well-aged arborist mulch, 10% to 20%. For me, this has become a bit of an optional extra just because I'm not bringing any mulch onto the property. But for 10 years when I was gardening on heavy clay soil in Titirangi, West Auckland, I was getting regular supplies of mulch, and it was so helpful to create pathways that helped to tame some of the kikuyu grass. And then after about 6 to 8 months, I was able to scrape that mulch up and use it in potting mix. It had aged enough that it was beautiful, sort of chunky wood that helps create air pockets. It's almost a little bit like hugelkultur in potting mix, where you want that a little bit of extra sort of stable carbon just to almost act like a sort of slow release. I don't think it's slow release fertilizer, but it slowly releases life into the soil. What else have I got there? Pumice sand. Sometimes it's not needed at all, but I think it helps with drainage in raised bed gardens or container gardens. And for my potting mix, I actually recycle my seed raising mix into my potting mix. And my seed raising mix is 1/3 pumice sand. So I'm getting that sort of 5% of pumice sand into the mix. And then the final extras, I've got CPP, Agnihotra ash, and well-aged chicken manure. The CPP is a biodynamic remedy called cowpat pit. I will stir up a bucket of this remedy each time I do a batch of seedlings. And anytime I'm in a customer's garden or a community garden space, I try and stir some CPP and spread it out just to help keep the energy high in that space until I'm back. Agnihotra, I will pop a link for you to go look up a little bit more about this. It's an Indian tradition originating from part of India, and it's a sort of a fire ceremony using dried cow manure and ghee and a mantra that is spoken as a few grains of rice are put into the fire as an offering, and it's timed at the exact moment of sunrise and sunset each day. So I have a little Agnihotra set, and I do the morning ritual through a lot of winter just because the days are really short and I get up early now. And I'm a daylight eater. I don't eat breakfast till the sun comes up. And so this Agnihotra is a moment of kind of meditative stillness. And the ash that's left over is incredibly good for the land. Well-aged chicken manure, this would be from, if you have access to chickens. I used to scrape up part of the chicken run where it had gone all sort of dusty. It wasn't smelly chicken manure. So this isn't cleaning out their nesting boxes and using that in potting mix, but you could certainly clean out the nesting boxes and get that material into a batch of compost, and then let that process and digest and age, and then the soil you end up with would have some of that well-aged chicken manure quality in it. So that's a little bit of an explanation there. So this is behind the scenes of my operation. There are buckets all over the place. I really need to create some labels, but to be honest, I know where all the different ingredients are. So on the right-hand side, this black sort of rubbish bin, this time last year, that was my mixing bowl. And so each batch of seedlings, I would blend in the extra ingredients that was needed to create the perfect sort of balance, and then pop the seedlings into it. So I do my seed sowing and seed raising mix, and then when the little babies get to about this stage, they get transplanted into potting mix, and they stay in these boxes for, it can be 2 weeks up to 4 or 5 weeks until they're ready to go out, and the timing is right with the biodynamic moon calendar, and I've cleared a space to put them in, or I have a customer whose garden is waiting for them. This image here is one of the pop-up workshops that I did at a library, and I think, like, I've got all the packets of seeds there. I must have been teaching seed sowing, but then I've also got seedlings. Someone there has a cuttings. It was probably a mixed workshop. That this is a way you can bring all these different ingredients together on a small scale to demonstrate how it's done. And a reminder that, well, here in New Zealand, when you buy organic compost at the garden centre, please look really closely at the label, because usually what's certified is the process and not the inputs. So actually, you won't know what's in that soil unless you make it yourself. So the Google Doc, I have my recipe, and then there's that glossary with some of the terms, and then there is a space for you to record your recipe, and it will change over time as you experiment on more of this and less of that, so you can track your observations and any links you find, or if you might want to take photos or measurements. And if you end up working with me in a coaching capacity, then that Google document is something that you then can share with me, so that I can come and look over your processes, and it becomes like a shared working document. So that is the DIY potting mix. Good luck.